Coming to you from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. It's time for the Gardening Simplified podcast, radio, and YouTube show with Stacy Hervella. Me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Well, today we'll talk about pruning, and wow, what a topic. It's an element of no-maintenance landscaping. And when I say no maintenance, I don't mean N-O, I mean K-N-O-W. Because it really pays to know what you're doing. And it's a stimulating topic. Did you see what I did there?
I totally did, yes.
Okay, so let's dive into it. You know,
You're cut off.
Over the years, very good. That is well done. I set you up there. Okay, so the questions I get throughout the years about pruning, many of them center around lavender, cutting back your ornamental grasses, spring bulbs, buddleia, hydrangeas, bramble fruits, rhododendrons, and azaleas. Would you agree?
Definitely hydrangeas and lavender. Those are the big ones. And yeah, buddleia gets in there as well. And I think there's just a lot of things that people wonder if they should prune.
Yes.
And I want to say right off the bat to everyone listening that pruning is not necessarily a sign of a good, well-maintained landscape.
Interesting.
You know, I think that people tend often to prune things because it makes it look like they're taking care of their landscape. It's like, I'm showing that I care because I went out and I meatballed these poor, yellow privets and red barberries at the gas station landscape, and that they're like, okay, now it's maintained. Now you can tell that I care.
So you feel like you need to do something.
Some people, yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I don't think that means just because it's maintained and pruned to within an inch of its life means that it's a good landscape, a healthy landscape. People, I think, generally over prune. But maybe that's just my own personal
No, I
taste.
agree. I'm not into the meatballs and tuna can look. I really am not. So it's interesting. And, when I think about one of the first things, I know I'm cut off here, Stacy, but one of the first things that pops into my mind when we say we're going to talk about pruning is shoplifting.
Oh. Like prop lifting when people take plant parts from the store so that they can go and root them at home?
When I ran a garden center, it was the number one shopliftable item, pruning shears.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And they are expensive.
They're expensive.
They're pricey.
But the point here is, here's the reason I bring it up. It is worth it to have good quality pruning shears, good, sharp, clean, bypass pruning shears. Saw, if you want to do a good job, you got to have good tools.
Got to get bypass pruners. And that's the thing, I think, and I made this mistake when I was new to gardening and I was a poor student. The anvil pruners were much cheaper than the bypass pruners. So the anvil pruners have a blade that comes down on a plate like
Smashers.
this. Yep. And then the bypass pruners are like scissors where the blades bypass one another. I didn't have a lot of money. I just saw the pruners. I was like, these are cheap and in my budget. And I bought them. And that was my first pair of pruners, as embarrassing as that is to say. But anvil pruners are really only good for cut flowers after you cut them off the plant and you're arranging them. Or I hear a lot of forestry people use them because they stay sharper longer, but not a great choice around the home landscape.
I agree.
Spring for the bypass pruners. You'll be glad that you did, and so will your hands.
Yeah, exactly. So when we talk about pruning, one of the first things we have to do is ask why. And we prune to maintain plant health, remove dead or dying branches, diseased branches, to train a plant, shape or height, improve the quality of the foliage or the stems or the flowers, because many times pruning will induce that on plants. Restricting growth hazards, safety first, fruit production, rejuvenation of an old shrub, that sort of thing.
Yes.
So there's a bunch of reasons why you would prune.
I have given so many pruning talks in my time, and the number one thing that I say right off the bat, besides pruning does not equal a good landscape, is that you should always have a reason why you are pruning. It might be multiple reasons, but every subsequent decision that you make about pruning, timing, how much, all of this other stuff depends on the reason why you are pruning in the first place. So if you don't have that reason good and fixed in your brain, you can't move on after that. So if you find yourself going, what do? You have to go back and revisit that reason that got you out there with your pruning shears in the first place.
Agree. And so you'll hear these general rules of thumb, like the 1/3 rule.
Yeah.
Cut back by 1/3. I use a budgeting analogy. Think of it this way, and this drives me crazy, Stacy, and I see it in landscapes, in homes everywhere. And that is, let's say, for example, you're having problems with your personal budget. And so you need to do a little pruning. Don't spend as much money. You can't go in there and just cut 10% off of everything. You can't decide, I'm going to reduce my mortgage or my rent by 10%.
No,
or my insurance, because you're not going to get away with it. So you're going to have to pick other things and reduce them further. So what I see topping or snipping. So pruning is a lot like watering. If people are indecisive as to what to do, then they decide to do just a little bit based on a schedule. And that's a big mistake because it creates real problems. Take a look at your pruning. Step back from the plant and decide, well, that stem's coming out completely because it's a crossing or a weak branch. That one's going to be cut back by 1/3. That one I'm going to leave alone. I really believe selective pruning is important, but understandably, there is so much confusion because there are different rules for different plants. Again, if I go back to hydrangeas, you created demystifying hydrangeas for that purpose because there's just so much confusion.
There is. And hydrangeas are a special case because you talk about hydrangeas as a monolith. They're all hydrangeas. But when it comes to pruning, there are different guidelines for the different types of hydrangeas. So you can, even though you lump them all together at the garden center, even though you might say, I love hydrangeas and mean all of the hydrangeas that we grow in our gardens, when it comes to pruning them, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And that is a little bit different than pretty much any other group of plants. But once you have understood sort of that key difference, it all kind of falls into place, I think. But you do need to know what you're doing. Again, if you don't know what you're doing, you can't do any of the following steps. You just can't do it because you don't know how much to cut off. You don't know when you should be pruning it. It's so important. And I think so many people, again, they prune because they think they should, not because they have a specific goal in mind.
At the same time, there's real benefit in pruning. So when we use the example of hydrangeas, there's benefit to pruning, for example, a smooth hydrangea or a panicled hydrangea. And so learning the difference between the hydrangeas is important. Another one that we get asked about a lot this time of the year, Stacy, is buddleia. And again, give the plants a chance to start up in spring before we start hacking away, and then make a decision that's based on why. And with a buddleia, many times they'll bloom better if you do a good pruning, but you don't have to do it right away.
Right. Just because you're pruning everything else in your garden at a specific time doesn't mean that is when you should prune the buddleia. And I do always recommend to people, buddleia is especially hard because on some plants when you're pruning, you can very clearly see where the leaves are emerging or will emerge. Those buds are very clear. On a buddleia, it's not necessarily so clear, especially on the main trunk.
Correct.
I remember this was something I encountered like in my first week of horticulture school, and they were like, prune this buddleia, and I was like, I don't know what to do, because you can't see, where the growth is going to come from. So you can always wait. If you give yourself time to wait, you can research it. You can reach out to proven winners, and we will help you with that decision. There's lots of other ways. That's why I always say, when it comes to pruning, when in doubt, don't.
Agree. And I always say that try as much as possible. If you need to prune, do it after blooming. Obviously not before pruning, particularly with spring blooming plants. I like dormant pruning because you get a good look at the shape of the tree or the plant that you're pruning. And you also prune to open up a canopy. It allows more light into the canopy of the plant. It allows air movement. So again, many different reasons to prune. And we're going to move this conversation into segment 4 because there's so much to talk about as it relates to
I think we're pruning in every segment today.
Outstanding.
Maybe not every question in Mailbag. Plants and Trial definitely about pruning. At least one question in Mailbag, very much about pruning, as well as a little bit of relationship advice that I think we're going to have to
excellent
to keep the peace there. But
I love that because again, you talk about lavender or things like tomatoes or flowering shrubs. There are so many pruning rules and things that can apply. I'll end this segment with a pruning limerick I wrote for you. That shrub in my yard is ballooning. It needs some serious grooming. Just how do I decide? My spouse is petrified. I'm holding a shears and assuming. The fallout may be stark if I cut and miss my mark. It's a pruning job gaffe. Everybody's gonna laugh. Maybe I'll wait until after dark. It's just gonna ramble on. I'll shape it to a pom-pom. Maybe no one will notice I've hacked my stephanotis. By morning light, I'll be gone. There's an approach. Plants on Trial coming up next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where it is spring. It is in full swing. The weather is maybe kind of sort of starting to cooperate here in Michigan and
hopefully
feel a little bit springy, although I have to say it has not really stopped people from working in their yards too much.
It has not.
I've seen a lot of people out there shivering. But
I'm out there.
But out there, I've been out there a little bit. Doing all the perennial cutback and all of that jazz. But of course, I like to leave my perennials as long as I can. I don't want to wait too long because then everything starts coming up. And then you're stepping on all this soft and tender greenery as you're trying to take out your perennials. But of course, I do know that a lot of insects and so forth are burrowing in there and waiting for their opportunity to emerge. And our conversation with Mike from Honey Tree Nursery the other week definitely inspired me to make sure I'm protecting all those little guys. So I just pile everything up into a big cut off plant part burrito.
A burrito.
For a couple of weeks until they emerge. But yes, I have been out there, and I know a lot of people start to wonder about pruning. And if you have like a mixed border, like I have and you have, where you have a mix of shrubs and perennials, it's really easy to just get in there and prune and prune and prune and prune. And then you're like, oh, crud, that didn't feel the same way. I don't think that was a perennial. I just cut one of my shrubs. You know, that
People
happens.
can make that mistake. You know, what drives me crazy is when I go through a neighborhood, weeping trees. Weeping trees. Do not prune those things to look like it's the Beatles' haircut from the 1960s. You see them everywhere. A nice weeping cherry or something like that. And it looks like the Beatles stepping off the airplane in New York in the 1960s. You've seen those, right?
I have seen them too many times.
Oh, man.
And yeah, it's so unfortunate because those plants could be so cool.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with having a weeping plant that covers the trunk completely and makes a magical, unique little space in there. Instead of the Dutch boy bob there, the bob haircut, but that's why do you have a weeping tree if you're going to just give it that silly little haircut?
Well, I think, again, it comes down to the fact, like I said in the first segment, taking the approach where you treat everything the same and cut it straight across, like when I was a kid and my mom would put a pan on my head and cut
Yeah, exactly.
right? Because I've got pictures. Not going to show them to you, but I got pictures.
So lots going on right now with the pruning. And of course, so today's Plant on Trial did have to speak to this issue of pruning. And today's Plant on Trial is Perfectamundo Double Purple Reblooming Azalea.
Interesting, but I'm glad you're bringing up the reblooming topic.
That's exactly it. Now, I will say right off the bat, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time talking about the Perfectamundo azaleas, even though I love them. They're absolutely gorgeous. They aren't exactly hardy for us here in Michigan. Out here in West Michigan, they do survive, but typically what happens is the winter was harsh enough that the plant lives, but the spring flower buds got, hit by all that ice. So you're kind of like, what is this thing doing when it's not even going to flower? But this is a reblooming azalea, and reblooming azaleas are very much a thing, but that surprises a lot of Midwestern gardeners because we don't have them here. All of the genetics that imbue that reblooming ability belong to species of azaleas that are much more tender than can grow in these climates. So ever since the first reblooming azalea was introduced, 20 or so years ago, they have been largely considered warm climate plants. I would say like mid-Atlantic, say Virginia, on down all the way through the South. You'll have no problem growing them down there. But I'm bringing this plant up because it is a great example of what it means to be a reblooming plant and how you prune reblooming shrubs. And we have a lot of reblooming shrubs. So there was a lot that I could have chosen. A lot of them that I've already covered. We've got our bloomerang reblooming lilacs. We have got our sonic bloom weigela. And of course, we have these perfectamundo azaleas. So reblooming plants, as the name implies, bloom alongside their conventional counterparts. So in the case of the perfectamundo azaleas, they are going to bloom in spring when other non-reblooming azaleas would. In the case of the sonic bloom weigela, they're going to bloom in late spring when other weigela do. Bloomerang lilac, blooming in about mid-May, just like other ones. And all of that first bloom on these reblooming plants is on what is known as old wood. Now, I see a lot of people online get really confused by this. Every plant has old wood. It's just wood that was created in the previous season or several previous seasons before. But the question is not whether the plant has old wood. The question is, where does it set the flower buds?
Yes. And
generally speaking, the earlier a plant flowers in spring, the more likely it is to have created those buds the previous season. Because, think about it. I said this when we had Show Off Forsythia as our plant on trial a few weeks ago. Right now the weather's still quite cool. The plant would not nearly have enough time in Michigan to create flower buds to open in a few weeks. Instead, they're making them last summer, overwintering them, and then opening them as soon as the going gets good in spring. So that's what it means to flower on old wood. The flower buds were created on the wood from last year.
And Stacy, perfect examples would be like lilac or magnolia,
yep,
or as you mentioned, forsythia.
Yep, definitely. Those earlier it blooms, the more likely it bloomed on old wood. But the difference with reblooming shrubs is that they bloom on old wood with those other ones, but they also have the ability to bloom on new wood. And plants that bloom on new wood, basically what that means, they didn't have any flower buds on them over winter. Once the going gets good in spring and they start leafing out and growing, then they create their flower buds for that same season. So examples of some shrubs that flower on new wood, roses are a great example. Roses flower on new wood. That's why you're able to prune them in spring, and they'll go on to bloom by about June. Panicle and smooth hydrangeas, of course, also bloom on new wood. So again, this type, no flower buds through the winter. And once it gets nice in spring, they will actually set those flower buds. Reblooming shrubs do both. And so what that means for pruning is that if you want to prune them, you're going to do so immediately after that spring bloom. And pruning them accomplishes a couple of different things. So number one, it will take away any seed that might have formed. This isn't usually a huge issue, certainly not on the azaleas. You're not going to get a lot of seed production, but it's one of the reasons why I do recommend doing this on bloomerang lilac, because they do set quite a lot of seed, and then that's just the plant putting a lot of energy into maturing seed that you don't want and probably won't even grow anyway. So it kind of refreshes them, reshapes them, and the key to reblooming shrubs, reblooming well, is that they have to put on a lot of new growth in between those two bloom times. And when you prune something, and I know, Ricker, you've got this on tap for later today, when you prune a shrub branch and you take off that tip has, it's like a hormone factory that's just producing these growth suppressing hormones for all of the leaf buds below it. So if you don't prune it, you've got one stem growing up, all season long. If you prune it, now all of a sudden, all of those lower buds are released, and now you have 6 or 8 or more growth points from that same branch. And now instead of just having one branch that's going to produce a flower cluster, now you have 6 or 8. So you're increasing the amount of growth that can set these new wood flower buds. And when you prune a plant, especially if it is established, you are actually going to encourage it to regrow because it has all the energy of its root system down below to recover from that pruning. So those two things combined mean the plant is going to put on a lot of new growth. And the more new growth that plant puts on in that window of time, the better your rebloom is going to be. So this is a case where pruning is not necessary, but it definitely is beneficial. And it's a situation too where if you don't have time or you forget to do it, not the end of the world. But if you really want the best from your plant, this is a very easy practice. It helps to keep the plant in control, keep it having that nice tidy look that people like, and you're just going to get the best flower set as well.
And the benefit you have here is you're suggesting, Stacy, to prune in spring after it's done blooming. And that's what we're going to do with the spring bloomers anyhow.
Anyway.
That's when we should be pruning them.
Yeah, so a lot of people get confused. Oh, I don't want to mess up the rebloom.
Right.
Now, if you don't prune these reblooming shrubs, you will actually get them to rebloom a little bit sooner. The pruning does delay that rebloom by a few weeks, but in my experience, it is more than worth it.
Yep.
The amount of flowers that you get and the longevity of that rebloom, because it doesn't kind of gas out, in a few weeks. It's going to, by the time it recovers from the pruning, the days are getting a lot shorter, the nights are getting longer, it's getting a little bit cooler, and that will help the rebloom really bring it home and look its best.
Absolutely.
So all of that for Perfective Mundo Double Purple Reblooming Azalea, but also, like I said, a stand-in for whatever reblooming shrub that you might have. And we have a lot, but there are other ones out there on the market. And, this is an important breeding goal for us because who doesn't want more flowers?
Correct. It's fabulous. And the number of cultivars now that are available, it's stunning to me.
Right.
I mean, the benefit is fabulous.
If you're going out shopping this season looking for some new shrubs, definitely consider some of these reblooming shrubs. And now you know how to take care of them, and it's dead simple. So you are set to go for the season. Of course, visit your local garden center for Perfect Mundo Double Purple or any Proven Winners reblooming shrubs or evergreens or any of our flowering shrubs. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we've got the garden mailbag, so please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where it is our pleasure to help you with your gardening questions, quandaries, and conundrums. And if you have one of those, you can reach out to us at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. There's a contact tab there. But of course, I know at this time of the year, especially, time is of the essence, and you don't always have time to wait for us to get to your questions. So know that you can also reach out to provenwinners.com or provenwinnerscolorchoice.com if it is a shrub question, and you will get a personalized answer from a wonderful horticulturist who will be happy to help you in a more timely manner than we can here in our once a week show. But we do have a lot of good questions, and I tried to pick some questions that I think are relevant to everybody at this time of year.
Nice.
So what do we got in the mailbag?
Raven writes, my pencil hollies were doing great all winter. We had a little browning, but then a cold snap. These containers are in my driveway, get a lot of wind. I'm wondering if too much wind, not enough root protection, not enough water, or all of the above. This will be the third year that they have been there. And Stacy, I don't know where Raven lives, but the third year, at least here in the north, the last two winters have kind of been outliers. They have not, this has been a tough winter, but the two previous. So to get a little bit of browning on a pencil holly, I don't think is unusual.
Right. So I think a lot of people are seeing something very similar to what Raven is seeing on her pencil hollies.
Agreed.
So if you're not familiar with them, pencil hollies are a broad-leaf evergreen, not a needle-leafed evergreen. And as we've talked about before, broadleaf evergreens, so basically leaves that are not like a reduced scale on like a juniper or a needle like on a pine or a spruce, these are much more susceptible to winter damage.
Correct.
Because they have that big broad leaf that all winter long, the sun is taking effect on it and it's taking water away. Wind is taking effect on it and it is taking water away. And if you live in a cold climate and the ground or the container media, because these are in containers, and of course there'll be pictures of Raven's hollies on the YouTube version as well as in the show notes, they can't take up water once that soil is frozen. So they're losing a bunch of water. They're not replacing the water. They can't replace the water. And as a result, these plants do tend to brown. And I think you have a great point, Rick. If this didn't happen in previous years, we have had more mild winters. But there are also a combination of factors that will help prevent this from happening. So mulch is a huge one. Definitely recommend a good 2 to 3 inch layer of shredded bark mulch over the plant. Really all times of the year, it will be happy, but it's especially crucial in winter, and then making sure that the plant doesn't go dormant thirsty. Don't send it off to bed thirsty. Make sure that even if that means giving it a little water like Thanksgiving weekend or late in the season like that, it needs to be well hydrated when it goes into winter, or else this browning will occur. So really, it's pretty minor on ravens, pencil hollies, but I have to say, once you see this kind of browning, it's not going to come back. That growth is not going to magically turn green. What can happen if the damage wasn't super severe is that even though they are evergreens, they will drop those leaves and replace them with fresh growth. So I don't necessarily recommend that you run out there right away and start pruning off the brown growth unless it's absolutely driving you crazy and it wasn't too severe. There's enough of the plant remaining that it's going to be able to survive and recover. If you can wait to see if it comes out. Now, if you know if the stem itself is very brown and withered, it's probably done and you can just go ahead and prune it. But really, there's not that much that you can do in these situations except to remove it and then try your best to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future. This happens really commonly with boxwoods. If you ever go to like any city in March, it's like brown boxwood city, exactly. Because so many people love them for like restaurants and that kind of thing. And, Raven, I've also found in my yard, in the middle of winter, things might look totally fine. But then when spring comes along, that's when all of a sudden that damage is just like, wait, where did that come from?
Well, and part of it is because it's not just wind damage, it's sun damage in winter also when the sun is low in the south. And so boxwood or pencil hollies that are on the north side of a house or the east side of the house that get some structural shade tend to do better. If you're going to continue to grow these, maybe consider an anti-desiccant spray in fall on these plants. It's going to help.
Yeah, that's a good idea too. That definitely helps to prevent further water vapor from escaping the leaves.
So you have a letter from Jamie and some pictures.
Yes. So Jamie, I wanted to answer her question because this is great. This is something that, again, I think a lot of people are dealing with. And also, I don't want Jamie's relationship to be risked.
Exactly. I love this note. I really do. And I have some advice for the boyfriend and the uncle. But go ahead, proceed.
So Jamie says, hi there. I have a limelight hydrangea that's about 10 years old. I've never pruned it, and my boyfriend's been very happy with how it performs each year. I did a hard prune after a lot of research. Good for you, Jamie.
Yeah, way to go, Jamie.
She said, I did not wing it, I swear. She said, I wanted to correct small crossing branches. Plus, it was getting too close to the house, and it needed a refresh. So she had her reasons all in place.
Smart.
Very good. Why she was pruning the limelight. She said, so he was fine with it, how it was. I'm concerned now that I messed up and it will not bloom, as my boyfriend and his uncle, who is a landscaper, said it will be sticks all year and not bloom. Sad crying face emoji. If that's the case, I will be so devastated that I ruined a plant that he loved and it produced well. Here's a before and after. Could you give me insight on how you would have pruned it and if I messed things up? But if all does look well, can I expect to see blooms this year and a healthy, refreshed shrub?
Absolutely, you're going to see it. Way to go, Jamie. I am so proud of you. You executed entrepreneurial savvy. Tell your boyfriend you're a genius. It's all going to work out. And, as Al Harris said in Apollo 13, I think this will be your finest hour. I think it, and as far as your uncle is concerned, again, Stacy, you guys have done so much work on hydrangeas demystified. I would refer your uncle to those articles or websites.
Well, I can understand where they're coming from, because if you look at the before and afters of Jamie's limelight hydrangea, it was definitely really big, and she reduced it quite a lot. And so it is a huge difference, and that is obviously a shock in and of itself after you've done that. People might be a little bit dubious, but panicle hydrangeas can absolutely handle this, and it will absolutely recover and grow well, and it will bloom this year. Now, I do want to caution you about one thing, though, because this is likely to happen. I've seen it happen, especially with limelight, plenty of times. If a mature limelight gets pruned really hard, like this one did, what often happens that first year after the pruning is it shoots up tons of branches. Yeah. So I've used this analogy many times on the show. When you have an established plant like this, the root system is basically an engine to fire growth. And when you have reduced, the plant that it was fueling. Now all of a sudden you have like, a 5.0 liter engine in like an Escort, a Ford Escort, something like that. So
it's a good analogy. It really is.
So you have a small plant, but a big engine.
Yep.
And so as a result, what the plant wants to do is put all of that energy into recovering from this pruning. So what can happen a lot is that it will put out really long stems with huge flowers, like insanely huge flowers. And that can make those stems a little bit floppy because the flower is so big. But this is a temporary thing. It's only going to happen this year. And as the plant starts to build up sort of a new, structure, exactly, it will be totally fine. And yeah, these big flowers are really amazing to see. It's actually kind of a fun thing to watch.
It is really cool. And I love that analogy. And Stacy, the important thing for people tuned in or watching on YouTube is to go back to the previous segment and your conversation about plants that bloom on new wood.
Yes.
And that's what we have going here, right?
Yes, definitely.
So Jamie's going to be fine.
Yeah, Jamie, you're going to be fine. You will have the last laugh. The flowers will be big. And if you like to do things with, big, dried or fresh limelight flowers, you are going to be in heaven. But yeah, don't worry. You didn't do any permanent damage to your beautiful limelight. And you can tell your boyfriend and uncle to call us. We'll, if they don't believe it,
I'll chat with them.
So thank you both so much for your questions. We're going to take a little break and then we're going to come back and we're going to keep talking about pruning. So please stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show, where today we are on the cutting edge. We're talking pruning. Stacy, I was thinking cutting your grass in spring is a form of pruning, and you get those, I think they call them GLVs, and I have it right here, green leaf volatiles, which is that aroma you get when you cut the grass.
Yes, love that smell.
Yeah, I used to have a fresh mown grass cologne that I would wear.
Like that.
Yeah, I had to get rid of it. I was getting looks when I would go out. But as it relates to pruning, people tend to ignore trees until there's a problem like a storm. Pruning, super important in trees. Again, opening up the canopy, taking care of problem limbs. We prune all kinds of stuff when we garden. Tomatoes. When you look at an indeterminate tomato, a tomato that doesn't set a terminal bud, pruning indeterminate tomatoes so the plant puts more energy into the fruit. We allow more light into that plant, better air movement. I personally believe that that's really, really important. And it's something that we haven't talked about yet today, Stacy, but that would be for people to look up or to understand terminology called apical dominance, correct?
Very, very important. Yep.
And so if a plant, again, is producing that bud at the tip, once you prune it back, as you noted, it's going to force some outward growth.
Yep.
And that's something that we call apical dominance. So, a pinch to grow an inch as far as annuals are concerned. I love pinching annuals. Perennials, cutting them back. And don't cut back perennials in the growing season too soon. Maybe the plant is done blooming like a peony, but if the plant is healthy, again, remember the foliage is absorbing sunlight, the process of photosynthesis. You're going to have a healthier plant as opposed to just because it's herbaceous, hacking it to the ground.
Right, for sure. Perennials are definitely a plant that, you can cut off any dead parts in spring. But after that, you usually don't want to be pruning them unless you're doing something like a lot of people will pinch phlox to keep it shorter and stronger. The summer phlox, the Chelsea chop. Yep, famous Chelsea chop. Of course, mums, classic choice for people to pinch and prune. And I've mentioned this on the show before, but I know books are kind of like going out of style. People don't really invest a lot in books, even gardening books anymore, because they just figure you can find it all online. If you are going to invest in a single gardening book for your library, it should absolutely be The Well-Tended Perennial Garden by Tracy DeSabato Oust. If you have perennials, of course. If you don't have perennials, this book will do you no good. But if you do have perennials, honestly, this book is amazing. You will learn so much, and she spent years literally pinching and pruning every plant in her garden at different times, recording all of the results. And the cool thing about implementing her techniques and findings is you can actually completely change your garden. You can delay bloom times, so different things will bloom together. And you can eliminate the need for staking on some things, because when you prune them, again, the plant has all that energy of its root system, and if it's putting it into, less of the plant, what will typically happen, especially with perennials, is everything just gets beefier, stockier, thicker. So that is such a good book, and will give you so many great ideas on how to maintain your garden. That is like the perennial pruner's manual. I love that book.
And upright sedums are another good example
Yep,
of
definitely.
that. Yeah, so that's a great way to go. Look up Chelsea chop also. Bulbs, cutting them back. Tulips, daffodils, these various plants. When they're done blooming, leave the foliage on for a little while and allow that photosynthesis to take place with the bulbs before cutting them back. You can plant annuals in between and get them off to a start. House plants, the best time to prune house plants, I believe, is in spring, when there's plenty of light to fuel recovery, new growth, and you can take them outside if you live in a cold climate. So houseplants in spring. Vines, many vines benefit from root pruning. If we look at wisterias or trumpet vines, again, showing that vine whose boss may get the plant to produce some blooms in lieu of producing even more growth.
Yeah, some people do claim that on wisteria, which of course can be notoriously hesitant to flower, and definitely is a plant that can appreciate some restricted root room. But mostly I find that wisteria needs to have its length controlled.
Yes.
Because it just wants to grow and grow and grow. And like, I don't need to produce any flowers. I'm good.
Got to show it who's boss.
Exactly.
Yeah. Of course, questions about grapes. With grapes, don't be timid. We prune them in the late dormant season, January to March, cane and spur pruning. Pruning bramble fruits, it's important to understand that essentially they're going to fruit on canes that live for 2 years. The roots and the crowns are perennial. So you get the new canes, and then you get the second year canes called the flora canes. Those are the ones that are going to produce the fruit, and those are the ones that we're going to prune back hard after they've fruited. So spring is a time to do a lot of your pruning, but again, you have to apply these principles, Stacy, basically of timing is everything, as we've discussed today. And some people would say, well, okay, but what about the evergreens? Well, yeah, there are evergreens like yews or taxus or boxwood that people traditionally prune into shapes, and you could prune pretty much any time you wanted to. Whereas other evergreens or conifers, it is easy to make a pruning mistake, and here's where I apply Stacy's rule. Don't. I mean, would you agree that if you prune a conifer and you do it wrong, Stacy, that it's going to take a long time, if ever, for it to recover?
Yeah, you can definitely screw things up pretty badly.
That's a good way of putting it.
But that said, I do want to say when we're talking about something like that, first of all, always, if it's a safety issue, please put the plant health out the window. Don't worry about when is the best time to do X, Y, or Z. If a branch is dangling or threatened to dangle, or something's growing, like a rose or something growing into your front walkway, and the mailman's getting caught on it every time they walk up to your house, just cut that thing back. Don't, let's do safety first. But the other thing is also, if you're taking out entire branches of a tree, that's also a different situation than when you're just cutting into the actual growth.
Yes.
But, generally speaking, people should not assume that doing more is better for the plant. It's not necessarily that it is extremely complicated or extremely mystifying, as we might imply with hydrangeas demystified, but that, you need to know the consequences of those actions and how it's going to affect the plant. And, sometimes that you just need to do a little research first and not go out there and be in the moment and just keep pruning and then go, what have I done? Don't do that.
That's exactly it. The landscape evergreens, of course, like I mentioned, hemlocks, boxwood, arborvitae, yews. I think summer's a good time to do that, or early summer. It's going to stimulate some new growth. Don't do it just before winter. You're going to get some dieback at that point. So I really believe early summer on those, if they need some shaping, would be the time to do it. And then, Stacy, a lot of confusion with people on clematis or clematis,
heck yeah.
however we want to pronounce it, because people will read about group 1, group 2, group 3 clematis, get totally confused. It's part of the reason I love cultivars like Happy Jack or Sweet Summer Love, because essentially with them, you cut them back to about 2 or 3 feet above the ground in spring when everything's looking dead yet, and just step back and enjoy it. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, it's a great example of what I was saying about the root mass functioning as an engine to grow, because people might say, well, geez, my, Sweet Summer Love clematis was 12 feet tall, 12 feet long last year. Now I'm going to cut it back to 2 feet. How is it going to get back to 12 feet? Well, again, the answer is in that root engine. And by cutting it back, you are basically resetting that growth point. If you didn't prune something like a Sweet Summer Love or Sweet Autumn Clematis, what's going to happen is the growth is going to start from all of those buds that are way up on top. And eventually when it flowers, it's going to flower less, and the flowers are going to be way up in the treetops.
Exactly.
So this is a case where pruning helps you, to have the best look. And the thing about clematis is that as long as you leave something in the ground, something to grow, the worst that's going to happen is you get a year without flowers. So generally speaking, I would say I hear from a lot of people who don't know what group or what type of clematis they have, and they don't know what to do.
Right.
So when in doubt, if you can find a name, you can probably look that up. If you don't know, split the difference, do the 2-foot thing. If you have few to no flowers, well, you have to prune a little less or at a different time next year.
Lesson
But
learned.
at least in that case, even though clematis can be very sensitive, as long as you're leaving something for the plant to recover with a good 2 to 3 feet from the ground, again, the worst that's going to happen, no flowers. Disappointing, but at least you didn't lose your plant.
So on this topic today, to cut to the chase, and and the long and short of it is people like Stacy and myself, or other gardeners or garden center people or experts, this is an area where we do a lot of marital counseling. So educate yourself and try to work it out.
Yes.
Because this has created a lot of upset through the years.
And it's only plants.
And it's only plants. Thanks, Stacy. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to you. Thanks for watching the Gardening Simplified show on YouTube or listening on podcast or radio. Have a great week.
A needle-leafed evergreen. What?
Oh, nothing. I just was thinking with a pencil holly, what's the point?
I was like, I could tell the pun was doing. And I could...
Little break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to keep talking about pruning. Stay tuned.